Hello, welcome back to tutorial number 6 on the BCoF Freedom map editor. In this tutorial we're gonna talk about spawn points, capture areas, and variation IDs. So once again, Ctrl E to open the scene props menu. Click on the scene props menu if you're not already there. And let's say your map is basically done, you placed your scene props, you sculpted your terrain and textured it, and now it's time for spawn points and capture points and, making the map work on different game modes. So, to place a spawn point, go to the capture points group, and then you'll see all kinds of different capture points here. And I'll quickly explain what each is. So a capture area is an area that you can capture, but you cannot spawn on. So you can only capture it. It gives you points in Conquest, for example. So you can win if you have 100 capture points, but you will never be able to spawn on them. A key capture area is the same thing, except the word key means that it's a very important capture point. For example, in a siege, that would be the final point that you have to capture to win the game, or in King of the Hill, the point that both teams have to capture to win the game. We have two different variations because, as I said, for 4s, we have this really nice flagpole with a large 4 flag, and yeah. Then next up we have a spawn and capture area, and that means that you can capture it, but you can also spawn on it. And we have the same for the key spawn. And then we have a spawn area, and it's just a spawn area. You cannot capture the spawn area, but you can spawn on it. And lastly, we have the home spawn area. The home spawn area cannot be captured, and it can only be spawned on by one team, and each map has to have a home spawn, because home spawns allow the full team to spawn. So no matter how many spawn points you have, you will always be able to spawn on it. There will always be as many spawn point spots as there are on the server. So each team on each map has to have one, so every map has to have 2 home spawns. So I obviously also suggest to just start with them. So let's say team 1 wants to spawn over here and they're the attackers. I'm just gonna place the home spawn area here, and then I'm gonna go and the defenders spawn over here. That's the other home spawn area. Now by default they're here, but they do nothing. So you're gonna have to configure them, and to configure them is you just click on them, select them, and then click into the variation ID area. Sorry, I was trying to find it in the list. There we go, that way we can see both of them. So it's this one. So you click into the variation ID area, and you'll see there's something called prop name, and you can rename this for anything. So if you have a special prop, you can name it whatever you want, so you can easily recognize it and search for it, for example. But in the case of capture and spawn areas, what it does is it will use this name in the spawn point. So if you're on the server playing this map, this is what you'll see as a player when you select the spawn point. So for example, in this, I'm going to call it main attacker. And then next up, there's something called a linking ID. A linking ID is unique for each prop. So if you have a prop with a linking ID of 1, you cannot have another prop with a linking ID with 1. So just keep that in mind. So maybe make a list of it somewhere, a notepad or something, of linking IDs you have if you have a large number of them on your map. Generally, if there's just 6, you can keep track of it in your head. In this case, this is the first one, so I'm going to give it linking ID 1. And then you see var1, and var1 controls which team is going to spawn on it. In this case, var3 is neutral, var2 is defender, and var1 is attacker. So I'm going to make it attacker because it's the main attacker. I'm trying to remember. Right, yeah, var free controls the letter. You might have noticed that in the game that spawn points have different letters. For example, A, B, C, D, and so on. So in var free, it goes from 0 to 25 for the different letters in the alphabet. So in this case, for example, I could make it 2 for this is B, or 0, C, or 1 for B, and 0 for A. So I'm just going to keep it for now. You can keep them all the same if you want to. The game's not going to break. It's going to look a bit silly, but no one cares. So that's the main attacker. I'm going to close this again, and I'm going to click on the other home spawn area. Then I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to give it link ID 2. I'm going to call it main defender. I accidentally unselected it, so I have to redo it. Linking ID 2, variation ID 2 because of the defenders, and I'm going to give it B. I'm sorry, I don't know why I keep saying the wrong thing. So now this is set up, more or less. Next up, I'm going to place spawn and capture area, and I'm going to place it over here in this broken, well, sort of broken building. You'll notice there's this large box around it, and that is the capture zone. So any player that is inside the zone will be able to capture. This also means that if you push it into the floor, they'll maybe not be able to see the flag because, you know, the flag is underneath the terrain, but they'll still be able to capture it as soon as, like, even if it's just for feet or inside the zone, they'll be able to capture it. So, in this case, I'm just going to place it somewhere here. Right. And what is it called? Spawn. There it is. I'm going to select it. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to call it broken building. And I'm going to give it linking ID 3. And variation ID 1, I'm going to keep default. So by by default, if a map starts, this is going to be a neutral spawn point and capture area. So no one will own it. People have to capture it first before they can make use of it. And variation 3, I'm going to make it 2 for B. For C. My god. Keep messing it up. I'm just gonna place it in the orchard. And I'll look. And I'm gonna call it the. I unselected it again by accident. The orchid spawn. I'm gonna give it ID 4 because I already gave 1, 2, and 3. I'm gonna make this because it's a key point. You can keep it neutral by default if it's a King of the Hill map. If it's a siege map, you shouldn't because no one's gonna own the 4 by default, which is dumb. So give it the defender ID, which is 2. And then here I'm gonna go for 4, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. No, 3. It starts with 0. For the next letter in the alphabet. So now you have these zones, but you don't actually have any spawn points because these are just capture areas, and if you try to spawn on them now, we have a backup in place, so it will just spawn you anywhere. It could even spawn you on top of a building, it could spawn you inside a wall. Doesn't matter, we just don't want the game to break. So it is recommended that you actually place spawn points manually and then link them to these objects. Now, the keycap is not going to need one because it's a keycap and it's just a cap, not a spawn. But the home spawns definitely need one, and this one also definitely needs one. So to do that, go to the spawn points tab, and you'll see all these spawn points. So you'll have a deathmatch spawn point, one for artillery, one for cavalry, and one for infantry. and you should just go and place your spawn points for infantry somewhere, right? For cavalry, I'm just gonna place them right next to each other, but it doesn't matter. Place them all here, and select them all. And you'll see they also have a linking ID, and if you remember, this is the defender home spawn, so this has the linking ID of 2. To link these spawns to this home spawn, you now have to give it the same linking ID. So in this case, I'm going to give them 2. So now all of these have the same linking ID as the home spawn, as to this one, which means that if you select this one to spawn on, you will spawn on these points. So we're going to place artillery, cavalry, infantry. Now it doesn't matter how many you place, because as I said, on the home spawn, everyone will always spawn on it. But it's recommended to place a whole bunch of them, because if the entire team spawns on it, it could be, you know, 100 guys or something, so you should place them. And you should probably also not place them this close, but it's just an example. So, ID 1, now they're linked to this one, because it's ID 1. Depending on how many spawn points you place, that's how many people are going to spawn on it. So if you don't place any, no one's going to be able to spawn on it, because there's no space. There's going to be 0 slots to spawn on this spawn point. If you make it, for example, if you place 3, and you're going to be able to have 3 on them. And hold on. Right, yeah, okay, sorry, I just had to look something up. If you place down these spawns and you go to variation ID, obviously now I want to link it to this spawn, so I place it variation ID 3, linking ID 3, I'm sorry, and variation ID 2 defines how many can spawn on it, on each one of these spawn points. By default it's 20, so 20 players can spawn on this one spawn point. What it means is you can have one spawn here in the center, one here, 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 and so on, and it will make 20. So you can now, okay, fuck it, I'm gonna delete it. Here we go. Sorry. I still don't have the correct thing selected. Here, sorry. So if you now change this, for example, to 2, then only 2 players will be able to spawn on it, and if you change it to 30, then 30 players are going to be able to spawn on it, and depending on how many are in this and how many spawn points you have, is how many players will be able to spawn on it. If you only place these infantry spawn points, for example, now we have this with 20, this with 20, and this with 30, means 70 players can spawn on this spawn area. But also only 70 infantrymen can spawn on it. There's no spawns for artillery and there's no spawns for cavalry, so those will not be able to spawn on there. So if I, for example, don't want cavalry to be able to spawn on here, I can place an artillery spawn and say, hey, only 5 artillery can spawn here, but 70 infantrymen. So now 70 infantrymen can spawn on here, but only 5 cavalry. Once again, here all of a player's team can spawn on the home spawns. That's why it's required to have 1 home spawn per map, because, you know, we need to be able to make all players spawn at all times. And yeah, that should be it for spawn points. Now, if you're as confused as me with like what variation ID does what, you can always press this button on the top left here, the little question mark, and here's a list of all the variation IDs and like explanations for all kinds of other stuff, so you can always refer to this. Now, we use variation IDs and linking IDs for other stuff, not just for spawn points, but spawn points is the main thing. For example, you can use variation IDs to change the amount of ammunition in an ammo crate, and you can link stuff, you can make doors, do different stuff, and all kinds of stuff. So I suggest to just read it once at least, and whenever you forget which variation ID is what, just check it out. Well, and that should be it for this one.